A war that was supposed to last for weeks dragged on for 8 agonizing years. It was a conflict that would define a generation, reshape the Middle East, and cement the reputation of one of its most notorious leaders. This is the story of Saddam Hussein's longest war, a brutal, bloody struggle that began with a fatal miscalculation and ended with a hollow victory, setting the stage for even greater conflicts to come. In 1980, Saddam Hussein looked across his eastern border and saw an opportunity. Iran, his longtime regional rival, was in turmoil. The Shah had been overthrown, and the new revolutionary government was still finding its footing, purging its military and isolating itself from the West. Saddam believed Iran was weak, disorganized, and ripe for the picking. A quick, decisive victory would not only settle old border disputes, but would also make Iraq the undisputed power in the Persian Gulf. It was a classic application of his core belief. A strong leader attacks before he is attacked. He envisioned Iraqi tanks rolling into Tehran within weeks, a triumphant parade, and his own status elevated to that of a modern Arab hero. The invasion began on September 22, 1980. The Iraqi army pushed into Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan province, expecting a swift collapse of the Iranian forces. To Saddam, it was a simple equation: superior military hardware plus a divided enemy equals a fast win. But he was about to learn a harsh lesson about the power of faith and nationalism. The first domino that refused to fall was the Iranian people. Instead of crumbling, the nation rallied. Ayatollah Khomeini, the new supreme leader, declared the war a sacred defense of the homeland and the revolution. His call to arms was answered not by thousands, but by millions. Young and old, trained and untrained, flocked to the front lines, ready to become martyrs. Saddam had completely underestimated the revolutionary and religious fervor that now defined his enemy. This wasn't just a war between armies, it was a clash of ideologies. The conflict quickly devolved from a blitzkrieg into a war of attrition, a grinding, brutal stalemate reminiscent of World War I. Trenches were dug, human wave attacks became a terrifyingly common tactic by the Iranians, and the dream of a quick victory evaporated in the deserts of the borderlands. The war became a test of pure endurance, a horrifying contest of which side could absorb more pain and sacrifice more lives. Saddam's strategic miscalculation was absolute. He was now stuck in a conflict he couldn't easily win, and from which he couldn't back down without losing face. Back in Baghdad, as the war ground on, the pressure mounted. The conflict was a massive drain on Iraq's resources. Oil revenues, the lifeblood of the nation's economy, plummeted as Iranian attacks targeted Iraqi tankers and export facilities. The prosperity of the 1970s was quickly becoming a distant memory. Faced with a struggling economy and a war with no end in sight, Saddam did what he always did when threatened. He tightened his grip. His rule became even more absolute, more brutal. The internal security apparatus, the Mukhabarat, expanded its reach. Surveillance became an everyday reality. The slightest hint of dissent, any whisper of criticism about the war, was treated as treason. The number of arrests, sham trials, and executions skyrocketed. Saddam used the war as a brutal tool of social engineering. He demanded total loyalty, and he got it through fear. He also used the conflict to purge and reshape the military, promoting officers based not on merit but on their personal allegiance to him. The Ba'ath Party's control seeped into every corner of Iraqi life. You were either with Saddam, or you were an enemy of the state. There was no middle ground. For the average Iraqi, the war wasn't just a distant battle. It was a constant presence, a climate of fear and paranoia that dictated their lives. As the years dragged on, the war became more desperate and more depraved. Faced with Iran's seemingly endless supply of volunteer soldiers who launched relentless human wave attacks, Saddam turned to his most horrific weapon. He authorized the use of chemical agents, mustard gas, and nerve agents like Taban and sarin against Iranian troops. These attacks were horrifically effective, causing unspeakable suffering and turning battlefields into toxic landscapes of death. This was a moral line crossed, a descent into a new level of barbarism. It was a decision born from his cold, pragmatic philosophy. Survival justifies extreme measures. If it took chemical weapons to stop the waves of Iranian soldiers and save his regime, then so be it. The international community was slow to react, but the reports and images that trickled out began to cement Saddam's image on the world stage, not as a regional leader, but as a ruthless war criminal. This chapter of the war, particularly the infamous attack on the Iraqi Kurdish town of Halabia, would forever stain his legacy and sever any remaining goodwill he might have had in the West. He was no longer just a dictator. He was a monster in the eyes of many. By the mid-1980s, the war was a complete stalemate. Both sides were locked in a bloody embrace, unable to deliver a knockout blow. The front lines barely moved, but the death toll climbed into the hundreds of thousands, approaching 1 million. Iraq, a nation with a much smaller population than Iran, was bleeding men and money. Saddam's treasury was empty. He had gone from being a lender to a debtor. borrowing billions upon billions of dollars from his wealthy Gulf neighbors, especially Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. They bankrolled his war, seeing him as a necessary bulwark against the spread of Iran's Shia revolution. But as his debt skyrocketed, Saddam began to feel trapped. He saw his Arab brothers not as allies, but as bankers holding his future hostage. A sense of frustration, isolation, and even betrayal started to fester within him. He had saved them from Iran, he reasoned, and now they were holding his debts over his head. This growing resentment, particularly towards Kuwait, was a seed that would later grow into his next catastrophic gamble. The man who started a war to become the leader of the Arab world now found himself isolated and indebted to it. Finally, in the summer of 1988, after 8 long years, the end came. Iran, exhausted, economically shattered, and demoralized by Iraq's chemical attacks and recent battlefield gains, accepted a UN-brokered ceasefire. Ayatollah Khomeini famously described the decision as being more deadly than drinking poison. For Saddam, this was the moment he had been waiting for. He immediately declared a glorious victory. Parades were held in Baghdad, monuments were built, and Saddam presented himself as the victorious defender of the Arab nation, the man who had stopped the Persian tide. But behind the propaganda, the reality was grim. Iraq was a nation in ruins, its economy was destroyed, its society was militarized and traumatized, and it was saddled with an astronomical foreign debt. The so-called victory was utterly hollow. An entire generation had been lost to a conflict that ended with the borders exactly where they had been in 1980. Nothing had been gained, and everything had been lost. The Iran-Iraq war was over, but Saddam Hussein's problems were just beginning. He was a supposed victor sitting atop a bankrupt nation, owing billions to neighbors he now viewed with deep suspicion. How would he pay this debt? How could he rebuild his country and his army? In his mind, the answer lay just to the south, in the small oil-rich nation that he believed owed him everything. Kuwait. The stage was set for his next and most infamous invasion. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and hit that bell icon, because in the next episode, we'll explore the fatal decision-making that led Saddam to invade Kuwait, triggering a global crisis and putting him on a direct collision course with the United States. You won't want to miss it.